everyone, to our first Rebels of the Heart segment of 2021. We will get started here in just a moment. We're allowing all of our guests to join us in the room, and then I will introduce our esteemed guests, and I'm looking forward to this conversation today very much. Welcome to our first segment of 2021. Happy Inauguration Day. It is a historic day. It's the first day of a woman vice president of a diverse background. It's an exciting moment, and I'm thrilled to welcome our guests here today on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have a great lineup of guests, experts in their area, in their field, and obviously very powerful women as well, and also of colors, which is amazing. So thank you all for bringing us your time, your value, and sharing your wisdom and expertise with our audience. We'll go around the horn here, introduce each of you, allow you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll get into a lively conversation. So thanks for joining us. We'll start with you, Carolyn.
Well, first, Derek, thank you for the invitation. I deeply appreciate it. Joy and Sophia, it is a pleasure to see you both. And so with that, Carolyn Johnson, I am the CEO of Diversity, Inc. I was named in 2019 after serving faithfully for 17 years in various roles within the organization. I identify as a millennial. I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And so today is a day of great pride and happiness and hopefulness. And so I'm sure we'll be able to talk about some other things about my role, but I will pause there and just say again, thank you for the invitation to participate today.
Thank you for joining us, Carolyn. Looking forward to talking with you. And we will go over to Joy Fitzgerald. Thank you, Joy.
Well, hello, everyone. And I too thank you, Derek, for inviting me to be part of the dialogue on today. And to be with two esteemed women is just awesome on a day that I am celebrating all women all over the world wearing my pearls. But I am Joy Fitzgerald, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Vice President and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Eli Lilly and Company, a pharmaceutical organization headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I'm just delighted to be here on such a historic day.
Thank you for joining us, Joy. Looking forward to talking with you as well. And Sophia, welcome to you also.
Thanks so much. And thanks for your patience. I know you lost me for a second. My laptop died, so I'm on my phone if it seems shaky, but it's fantastic to be, thanks for the invitation, Derek and Stefan. You know, Carolyn and Joy, I mentioned before is that, you know, I've watched you from afar and I've learned from what you've delivered, either through your leadership, your organizations. And so this is just a great moment. It's a great moment today. You know, my daughter and I watched the inauguration and said, go Auntie G, you know, because we are South Asian. But look, to have a woman like, you know, just the Honorable Harris, I will say, okay, to me is just massive. So it's a brilliant day to be with all of you.
Well said. Thank you. And again, for our guests, I'm Derek Lundsten, CEO of LifeGuides and the host of Rebels with a Heart, the New Rules of Leadership. And LifeGuides is a platform that connects people who have been through an experience in their life with those who are going through that challenge so they can receive support to have healthier, more productive lives and companies. And obviously, we are big advocates of diversity, equity, inclusion in our team and in our customer base. So with that, we will start with our first question of the conversation. And again, each of you and all of you can take this in whatever order you'd like, but on that theme of our first female vice president of a diverse background and the fact that we have a new administration, a new reality for our leadership of our country, how does that change the way that DE&I is looked at kind of on the high level and within your organizations as we look at 2021, and how do you see that already changing the way that you're going to be approaching this next 12 months, for example?
Well, I can go first. I'll tell you that at Lilly, we've been on a journey for a number of years to improve the representation of leadership and individuals in our organization to better reflect our patients and the communities in which we serve. And, you know, one of the things that we have learned over time that's so important to people, and I remember an old adage my grandmother used to say to me as a little girl, it's hard for people to dream what they don't see. Mm. And if you just look throughout history, particularly, and I'm speaking now as an African-American woman, You know, the numbers are small and very dismal of seeing us in board seats, in CEO roles of major Fortune 100, 200, 300 organizations. And that ceiling for many women that have brown skin feels at times like a cement ceiling. And today, the agenda of what's possible is on the center stage of the United States of America. And we get to see, all women, all girls, all men, we get to see what's possible for women who look like us. And for me, that gives women and our organizations permission, because sometimes people are just waiting for permission to do what they know is right to do and advocate for talent that looks different. And I think the agenda and the call to action, certainly for our organization, has been raised and will continue to raise the bar. And I hope that today serves as that call to action for organizations across the world.
Joy, you just said it beautifully. I couldn't agree more. Look, whether it's 2021 or looking back for a minute at 2020, I happen to live in Minneapolis. I happen to live in, the city where Philando Castile was killed, actually by my police department. And so I've been very active in this community, and then George Floyd. But it's not just those two, there's just countless, right? Literally countless, and every day, every week. So for me, when I think about what's changed, certainly the young lady, the 17-year-old who had a camera that could capture what happened and the murder of George Floyd. And I say murder, I know I get a lot of flack for that. But what has happened is people suddenly went, oh, I see. Okay, things haven't really changed. And so I'm a cautiously optimistic person. We're at Thomson. So I'm at Thomson Reuters. I don't know if I even said that. I lead diversity and inclusion there. And I've been doing this work for almost 30 years. And people are talking, not just, oh, I'm aware now. Let's look at a spectrum of where I am in this diversity space. Like, no offense, but like, it's not about, I don't need to know where you are on the spectrum. I need to be able to, we need to engage each other. So the engagement, the conversation, the willingness of our leaders to actually talk about justice and talk about equity without saying the cliche competitive advantage and all of these things that I've heard my whole career. There's much more humility, I hope, that will move forward.
I love it. And Sophia, I will tell you that it was murder. And anyone who gives you slack for that, they probably need to check themselves. So there's nothing wrong with telling the truth as you see it. It was murder, and that is the end of that story. I have to say that I am in that space right now where it's all about truth telling, right? Mm-hmm. And so, Joy, when I think about your CEO, Dave Ricks, and when I think about the level of engagement that it took for you all to rank number 3 on the top 50 list and to rank highly on our specialty lists. For me, that's what is getting organizations there. And that is what is getting the other leaders of those organizations to trust the journey, to trust the vision, to trust the strategy, that you are telling the truth, that you are acknowledging that there is a problem, that you're being transparent in what has gone wrong up until a certain point, and that you are invested in being part of the solution. And I think that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing that we all understood what happened on January 6th, when a group of people who do not respect our democracy thought it was a good idea to attempt to take it over. We are seeing a group of people who are saying no more. We will protect each other. We will protect this democracy, and we can do this together as long as we're resilient. That is what I believe we are seeing right now, based on what's happening in Washington right now. The fact that we've all gathered here today, that's what I'm seeing from my vantage point.
Thank you for all of you and your comments. And I just want to acknowledge the boldness and truth in all of your statements and the courage that you have, and obviously the courage that you've shown to accomplish what you've accomplished in your careers to this point. And I'm excited for what is to come with giving you a other platform. I say this from a place of privilege, being a white male, and I'm also excited for my daughter, right? That she has the opportunity, now to see that for herself. That and she's only 3, but it's this moment in time. We'll look back at that anything is possible, even for that. And I think that it does. I think about the words from the other day, the dream that we're building together from the speech earlier today of what is possible. And I think that's really, really exciting. And it's interesting. I have, Carolyn and I share New Jersey roots. Sophia, I have ties to Minneapolis as well from my previous work experience. And I was mentioning to Joy that Eli Lilly has been one of my longtime partners in my career. So I have affinity for all of your work on a very personal level. Coming around organization for a moment, Carolyn, I think it'd be helpful for you to share a little bit about Diversity Inc. and the company specifically, because I think that as we do look to elevate the importance of this and we do bring these conversations to boardrooms, into executive teams, I know this is something that you're doing with many organizations. I'd love you to share a little bit about the company as we continue to walk around a bit.
Sure, no problem. I could step you through the elevator version about Diversity Inc., right? So we were founded in 2001 by Luke Visconti, who is currently our founder and chairman. And we were a bootstrap organization, meaning we launched a website first and then a magazine later when we were able to pay for it ourselves. We are the producers of the annual Diversity Inc. Top 50 Companies for Diversity competition. That's what we're most known for because it is an empirically driven process. It's an editorial process where we look at 6 key areas that determine how healthy a diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging strategy really is. Those areas that we look at are human capital diversity metrics. And it's not just looking at your total workforce, but we look at it in pieces. So we look at the ethnic and gender makeup of your board of directors. We look at the same diversity dimensions for your executive leadership team. And then we also look at the total workforce makeup. For the first time in 2019 for the 2020 competition, we actually asked about the level of trust that your leadership has with your organization, meaning disclosure. How are people telling you about their veteran status? Are people sharing with you their orientation? Are people sharing with you whether or not they have a disability that may be unseen? That is a measure of trust that we haven't talked about a lot in the past, but in the survey this year, we actually went there. We also look at workplace practices. We look at talent development. We look at philanthropy, and we look at supplier diversity. And last, but certainly not least, we look at leadership accountability in all facets of the 5 previous categories that I shared. That culminates to the annual Diversity Inc. Top 50 ranking, where while we have 50 companies that list from 1 to 50, we recognize 113 or more, depending on the other specialty lists we have. Not my words, but I have heard it said that Diversity Inc.'s Top 50 is the gold standard for diversity and inclusion measurement in corporate America. And so that's just a little bit about us. I don't want to go on forever, but hopefully that gives you and folks that are not too familiar with us an understanding of when we got here and what we've been doing along the way.
And if I can say, Derek, I can attest to that. I think, Carolyn, I've been at a few other companies, okay, in my career. So Medtronic, Wells Fargo, 3M, okay, PepsiCo. And so I've been around, okay. And when I have been at those companies, I have used in my role, and even though Thomson Reuters, I don't know if we've actually, to be honest with you, I've only been at the company about a year, and I'm exploring where we go next. And to me, Diversity Inc. has been the most comprehensive, and I have used it as a way to build the foundation of the strategy. Because we can get the internal baseline. Well, what's happening outside?
Exactly.
So I will tell you that I have used the research. I have challenged Luke in my prior terms with a few things, and I'm really glad to hear that so much is continuing to expand under your leadership.
Thank you.
I would agree. Diversity Inc. certainly is a gold standard, and they are known for speaking truth to power.
Oh yeah.
Luke certainly has their reputation, and so does Carolyn. Very helpful because they're able sometimes to come into the room and say things that some of your practitioners have said for years. And then when they say it, it's like, that's a great idea. It always happens. So we love partnering with the organization.
Thank you both for your kind words.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing with the audience. I think it gives the audience the understanding of how wide and deep this goes within organization, within the culture of the areas where we can influence change and make things happen. And that kind of ties in with the next question, and kind of along the same lines. You have the chance to see the best of the best. You all work for progressive leadership, progressive companies in this area. Obviously, for a while now, there's been a lot of talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's one of the rubs, is how do we actually do something? How do we make change really happen? How do we steer it? How do we guide it? How do we initiate it? How do we influence it? My impression of each of you is that you all have been very successful at doing that personally and professionally. And I'd like you to share some of the lessons that you've learned, some of the bold initiatives that you're taking now to really initiate and do something as we make this change happen. It could be within your company, it could be within your community, it could even be a past example. But I think helping people who may not be the best of the best, the highest rated organizations, really think through how do they start moving their teams and their leadership towards this direction.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I will share that I've learned, and I don't know if it may work for other organizations, but it certainly worked for us. And that is, it's been my experience that diversity and inclusion really accelerates from an awareness and understanding perspective to one of action, advocacy, and allyship when it becomes personal and real. Let me be clear. A lot of people wake up to the nightmare or from the nightmare of exclusion and racism and all of these other isms when it hits their home or things that matter to them. And at our organization, we took the approach to understand the lived experiences of minority populations inside of our organization. So it wasn't necessarily a white paper about another company or another organization. It was about us, our people that we feel like are family to us and that mattered to us. And it became real. And it went from a head conversation of one of intellect to one that pierced the heart. And it touched and influenced people in a way when they were understanding that my peer experiences this, they get pulled over by the police officer on their way home or have to carry a badge just so that this officer would know that they are an upstanding citizen. These were the stories we rarely talked about in the workplace, that we gave room and space for people to discuss in a real way that has helped influence and really escalate our continuum of where people are becoming active and are advocating because it's real for them. And I would highly encourage organizations. I love benchmarking. I think it is amazing. But I think the and you need to add to your strategy is understand the populations inside your conversation, inside of your company, so that it can become real. You can put a name to it, a face to it, a voice to it. And I think it may move the needle for you. It is certainly for us.
Yeah, I'm like nodding my head emphatically because actually I love the work that you did. I remember it being highlighted at Catalyst. And it was the one thing that I really remember was, you know, you almost did, you know, like research of your own talent. And I think in my mind, if I may just expand a little bit, I think that's what has been missing. You know, I've been, like I said, a lot of us have been in and out of the space. We have done all kinds of things, the training, let's take this assessment, that assessment. But at the end of the day, one of the things I know that we've been doing at Thomson Reuters is I tend to look at things from what are we doing within the system? What are our operations? What do we do? Let's look at an employee life cycle. We know that we assess talent. Okay, everybody has goals, objectives, we assess talent. We know we do succession planning. We know we have to look at our markets and think about where we have talent. But do we know the talent? So we do these things, but do we really know the talent? And something as simple as, and I knew you might roll your eyes, some of you go, I get it, but get to know talent. What I mean is not just say, oh, I have a red, green, yellow heat map that says I got to know people. No. Do you know why they stay? I'm not saying you have to do a stay interview, right? You can do all kinds of things, but don't overcomplicate it. Actually ask your leaders. We're doing this now. I'm actually sitting down and saying, I know you have talent that is coded high potential, key talent, all the indicators. But when you really look at where the diverse talent is, and I mean across all dimensions of diversity, you're not seeing the talent necessarily coded. And this is any company I've been with. Okay, so I'm not bad mouthing anybody, nothing. I'm just telling you the truth. And then I say, well, let's step back and I want to look at the entire organization. And I want to know where the talent is sitting. What is the plan? Where is the succession we're not talking about? And how are you sitting down and asking someone, what do you want to do? What are you interested in? Like, don't have a script. Just get in there and start having a conversation. Like, let's build some relationship skills. We talk about being all great at collaboration and networking, but we need to do it so internal. So the over-index on internally getting to know your pipeline. Second piece of that is BRGs. Thousands of employees belong to BRGs, some known and unknown. How are you really building that pipeline and a CV of sorts to understand who are in the BRGs? And that's actually part of my goal this year, is to really pay attention to how am I really helping build that pipeline? So there's just things you have to do to look internal first. And like you said, Joy, I love benchmarking. Like I said, Carolyn, and I mean, I look at tons of stuff, but at the end of the day, that's only as good as what we're doing internally.
Yes, and yes to what Joy said, yes to what Sophia said, and I will add to that, that it starts when you have leaders who are interested in transparency and partnership. And let me unpack that so that we're all on the same page. And Joy, you said this. How are your people? And I equate that to the health of the organization, because we all know, and especially in your business, our people are our greatest asset. And we cannot be the most competitive. We cannot be the leader in our space. And we cannot be organizations where people want to go and stay working if we truly don't understand the culture, what it's like to come and work here. What's the onboarding process look like? What does orientation look like, right? Because we know those are very different things. I think about, and we've got to make sure that we tie in what's going on in the world right now to this conversation, because we are not working in one place and living in another, right? And so right now, do you understand that there's a concern that your employees are worried about whether or not the person who is going to determine their bonus, what assignments, what teams that they're put on is a person who wished they could have been in the Capitol on the 6th doing bad things. You've got to understand the temperature at all times of your greatest asset, your people, if you're going to be effective. And as you said, that's not just benchmarking externally, but it's exercising that muscle that we have to get used to, that measurement muscle, that checking in muscle, that asking the hard questions and then doing something about the information that you receive. And the transparency part of it, we cannot hide. We cannot hide behind external, right, accolades anymore. You've got to do the work inside so that the beaming comes from outside, and the people that work at the organization own the recognition that you get externally. So I'll just kind of like underline it. Leadership, accountability, and partnership. If you work at a company and you have been tasked to lead the diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging initiative, and there is no partnership with your US lead or CEO, then that is a disaster and you are set up to fail. And I look at, and Joy, I'm using you as an example, and I'm sorry, but I think about the fact that when there's going to be an announcement about some new changes or improvements, it is not dropped on Joy. It is a team effort, and she has the support of her CEO. And if it succeeds, it succeeded because they did it. If it fails, it's because they failed. It's not, we win, you lost. Mm-hmm. And so these are the types of things that, from my vantage point, based on data and not on emotion, these are the things that I have seen as successful signs of a healthy and long-term stable D&I practice. Again, based on the top 50 data and the information that they share.
I totally agree. I mean, I think, I've been in different industries. I've worked with different leaders, all with different kind of temperament in the space, right, Carolyn, as you mentioned. And I will say, I know one of the things that's really unique, I think, at Thomson Reuters is we have the journalists. We have an entire newsroom. We have to pay attention to the diversity of the journalists. We have journalists in the front, the front lines on January 6th, right? Part of the mission is access to justice and transparency. And it's a really interesting way to think about diversity and inclusion, whether it's the products we do in tax and law, but also what are we reporting? Who's doing the reporting? Where, right? And so really paying attention to like every aspect of how we operate. And so to me, it's like part of that D&I, is what's the operations plan? Have the strategy, but how are we actually operationalizing it? And I know people probably get tired of me at the company. I'm like, so no, how are we going to do that? Like we can talk all day, but I want to know, how are we going to do that? Who is going to do it? Who's accountable? What's the metric, both quantitative and qualitative? Because you know what? It might suck. Let's be honest. And no metric can tell you that. But the experience of the employee will tell you, hey, that's not going to work. You're not listening.
Yeah. Yep.
So
I'm sure, Derek, you have lots of questions for us.
I do. I have so many things. I mean, one thing I want to acknowledge, the first step is we're having a conversation, which is just important. I have a couple comments. One, from the speech earlier today from President Biden, he talked about walking in someone else's shoes, right? The concept of empathy. Johnny Taylor from Sherm was on here last month, and we talked about the empathy need across enterprises. I'm sure you guys all know Johnny.
Yes.
But really what it comes down to is, on a practical level, as a leader, and you mentioned this, Carolyn, you need partnership, you need CEO, you need C-suite buy-in, advocacy. How do we encourage our executive leaders, myself included, to walk in the shoes of people that need the opportunity, that need to be seen, to be heard, to have opportunities that they won't really see, to give them the chance? How do we foster that sense of connectivity within organizations from your perspectives and broader as we think through the second half of 2021, we start hiring again. The great rehire that's going to happen.
Yeah.
How do we do that differently this time? Anyway, that's my quick multi-part question.
So one thing that I will say, and I think that any leader must do this and must do it regularly, and that is to make sure that you have a group of advisors around you who are not just like you, and that applies to anyone. It applies to me. If I have a group of advisors and they're all short Black women who have blonde hair and they're 4'10", I'm probably going to get the same perspective, right? And so I think it starts with taking an honest, hard look at who's around you as your advisors. And mind you, when you're talking about publicly traded organizations, I'm not talking about your board of directors, because you can create your own group of advisors. You can reach out to people who you admire, who you think do things well. And because we know that we're all in this together, right? And especially when we think about the impact of COVID-19 and the global impact of COVID-19, we truly are all in this together. So I tell you that the first thing is take a hard look at who's around you. And if you feel stuck, then you need to change who's around you. So that's number one. Where to look. There are organizations, if we're talking about senior leaders, yesterday I moderated a panel for the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce. It was a CEO roundtable, and on that roundtable was Marvin Ellison, CEO of Lowe's, Roger Ferguson, CEO of TIAA, Tunde Sunday, CEO of the Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, and also Carl Amata, he's the CEO of Novant Health, right? And it's interesting how if you look at their boards of directors, and then if you go and you look at other organizations that they're a member of, like the Business Roundtable, Joy, I know that your CEO is a member there. There is no excuse for not having a group of people that can help you find your way down this very, very challenging leadership journey. You just have to look, but you first have to start with yourself. Do I have the right people around me? Am I making the same mistakes over and over again? Am I really committed to this change, or am I just offering lip service so that people won't really challenge me? I think those are 4 things that you have to do in order to get better.
Yeah. I would say the first thing that's a real standout for me, it starts at the top. And when you have a committed CEO I can tell you, as having been in this role at my organization, another organization, it can make the world of difference. One of the famous quotes I love to hear Dave Ricks say is that if you aren't keeping score, you are just practicing. And a lot of companies have been practicing diversity and inclusion for a number of years. If we think about it, you're dealing with business leaders who do business every day. They're very innovative. They're very competitive. They know how to get things done. Why can't we believe that they can get things done as it relates to respecting and honoring humanity of all people? It requires two things, not only transparency, but we got to hold leaders accountable. And that starts at the top with your CEO holding himself accountable, the board holding you accountable, and the CEO holding his direct reports and therefore and their own accountable. The same way you measure your business goals, your diversity goals are core to your business. It should be cadenced, managed, and resourced at the same degree you do all of your other business goals and metrics. And when it's at that table and the accountability hits your performance indicators, your compensation indicators, that's when people will begin to understand how to treat it as a business.
100%. Listen, I'm nodding my head again because at the end of the day, I mean, I say the same thing. I consistently, and I haven't had to necessarily prove that with our CEO. Our CEO joined, almost a year ago, around the same time I did. And immediately when he came in, he said, we have to think about diversity, equity, inclusion for our people, for our customers, for our community, period. That was just from day one. But exactly what you said, Joy, is it cannot be, okay, we're going to talk about all the business stuff. Oh, and then we're going to talk about HR over here. Oh, and then we're going to label everybody and put a star by you. And we're going to put an asterisk if you're this and a check if you're this. And then, I mean, let's just be real about this, right? There's a lot of ticking boxes and making the slides look really pretty. And, and I know I'm sounding bratty, but I've been through this. And I've said enough. We're not going to do that anymore. Yeah. What we're going to do is talk about business and people and diversity in the same conversation, because guess what? Not only the people demand it in the company, to your point, Joy, we have to look internally. Like, we can't be pretending we're doing this and this out in the community. I'm not saying we're pretending, but you know what I mean. You get my drift, I hope, team and the folks here, is that we do a lot in the community. We throw thousands and millions of dollars out there, but are the people feeling it internally? Are they feeling it in their soul and spirit? Or do our customers understand? And I will tell you, I have been in so many customer conversations more than ever around, they're expecting us to be thought leaders. They're expecting us to help them. They're saying to us, hey, I'm looking at my book of business differently, or I'm having to look at the law and interpret the law from an equitable mindset. Is there bias in what we are doing? So the conversation has changed dramatically. And the accountability. And it's not an opt-in, opt-out. It is no longer you get to say I'm in or out. Right. You're either in or you're not. I hate to say that, but if you're going to be a leader, you better decide. Yeah. Is and if it's not right for you, then maybe you shouldn't be there.
And I think our customers are demanding it and requiring it.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I can certainly.
Absolutely.
And I have become a more conscious consumer. Where I spend my money, where I don't spend my money, brands that I support or don't support, it is because their stance or lack of stance on values and the things that matter to me. And that's kind of new for many companies over the last several years. And when it begins to hit that bottom line relative to their ability to be able to thrive in this environment, I think it's putting pressure on organizations to behave differently and to think about D&I differently.
Yep. And Joy, I will add to that, to communicate differently, because you have organizations, and especially when we were watching George Floyd be murdered, the snuff film of his murder, a lot of organizations were quick to take to the waves and talk about the money that they were giving and how awful it was to see. And then they went away to be heard from never again. And so I think that there's another piece of this. There is the engagement of your existing workforce, but then there is, Joy, to your point, not only are you thinking about, being a more conscious consumer, but when you decide to leave one place and go to another, or when you're graduating and you're trying to figure out where you're going to go work, do you want to work for an organization that does not recognize you as an equal to anyone else that may be different from you? And so that's the other piece of it. There's how it impacts your bottom line based on how people are buying from you or patronizing you. But then it's how it's hitting your bottom line, because some folks just don't want to work for you because the invitation is not very interesting or exciting or even fair and honest. And so there are organizations where this type of work is foundational. And then there are other organizations where it's discretionary. And you've got to ask yourself, well, what type of organization are you? And then the other question is, what type of organization do you want to work for?
Mhm.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think Joy, you may have mentioned it before we got started, right? I think you said you have a senior in high school. I know that I do, and my daughter and I watching the inauguration this morning. But even prior to that, all the universities, all the internships, and things she has turned down because what is she going to do with a mother like me? She kind of has no choice but to evaluate where she's going to spend her time. Yep. And where she's going to invest her time and her knowledge, et cetera, right? So there's just a lot we need to pay attention to from not only who's in the workforce, but who's coming in, yeah. And how they see it, doing the work very differently. And it's actually no longer just acceptable, like I said, for this to be an opt-in, opt-out, yeah. For leaders, for anybody really at this point. And it sounds harsh, and I've gotten a lot of flack for that too, right? A lot of people saying, hey, what about people on the other side? Yeah. Right? Well, if we're going to talk about inclusion, are we including those that have vehemently different opinions? And I would say that's the other part of this too. This work I've found this year that I think has been the most humbling for me is I've had to hit pause a lot and sit down and reflect more than I ever have to make sure I'm listening to people that are not on the same team as me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And really just be conscientious about people that vehemently have a different perspective.
Yeah. That kind of leads in. Go ahead, Carolyn, finish your thought.
No, and I was just going to because I'm paying attention to the chat as we're talking, and Karen talks about the fact that investors care too. So yes. If we think about ESG, environmental, social, societal, and then governance, right? This work falls right into the S and the G.
Yes.
And so people are also saying, I am not willing to invest in an organization that is not conscious and is actually executing against this work. So that's another pillar of this conversation that we have to pay very close attention to.
I agree.
Completely agree. And if you're just from the point of foundational and consistency over an extended period of time, seeing this in action, I think is something that's really just resonating and I think coming through loudly for our audience here. And for me personally, I'm taking pages of notes. So the other thing I was going to say, kind of along your point, Sophia, is when you look back at 2020, we had a convergence of crises, right? Leadership flaws in organizations, as well as things that were happening well, were exposed at a whole nother level, right? When you look at, and so it was a watershed moment around, in my opinion, around DE&I and what this means. But for you personally, what was and you kind of already shared it, Sophia, what was the lesson from 2020 that has really either changed or reinforced how you're approaching DE&I within your companies or within your communities? And I have another question kind of along that later, but I'll come back to it. But there's this one for now.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question because it's even in answering, there's a level of vulnerability, right? Yes. Where I think where I'm at, and I think also personally and professionally, right? This is my life's work. This is what I've been doing for as long as I can see it. My father was an activist. And so I've been through a lot of different things in my life and career. And I think I'm just more bold. It's not that I was never opinionated. Okay. It's not that I was never educated or all those things, but I've stepped into the arena a little differently from 2020 to say, no, I do have the experience. So kind of to stop questioning my own, background and experience and to be more bold. And what I mean by that is not just to be bold for bold, but like I said, hit pause and really just be conscientious about what I'm saying, how I'm interacting and picking my battles and really prioritizing. Okay, what am I going to bring to the table? What are the conversations that have to be had that I'm saying, no, we're not going to leave this room. We've got to talk about these things, right? So I'm just being more, I would say, unabashedly clear.
Yeah.
Thank you for that vulnerability.
I would speak both on professional, but also a personal level. I remember early March, many of us had just come back from the Women of Power conference that was sponsored by Black Enterprise, and the pandemic had really just kind of hit, and our organization quickly made a decision to pull majority of the workforce out of the office. And at that time, recognizing that you were going to have people trying to manage school, work, these new normals, I thought, let's pull back on a lot of the activities and things that we had planned, trying to be gracious and honorable, recognizing people had competing priorities. And then we just began in my office to get a numerous emails from people saying, where are these activities going? We're dealing with this, we're dealing with that. And we created a 12-week series that any employee was able to dial into for 12 consistent weeks from noon to 1. And we called it Make It Safe to Thrive in a Time of a Pandemic. And we dealt with things like a pandemic does not discriminate. We talked about Black Lives Matter, living alone, trying to be a principal and a mother and an executive at a company. I mean, you name it, generations, everything that our employees were telling us they were struggling with. It was us looking at diversity through a different lens, one that was new for many of us. So it made many of the barriers that people already had been facing even heavier. And one of the words that a few members used to describe the experience, and in particular in the wake of the George Floyd murder, was just perpetual trauma that people are going through. And it caused us to create strategies of well-being. We amped up our well-being efforts to be able to offer support to ensure not only psychological safety, but some well-being strategies and tactics to help people manage this new workplace we were all trying to deal with. And then secondly, I would say after the George Floyd murder, we came together, our CEO, the sponsor of our African American Network, head of HR, and many others, and we heard from African Americans, and I think this is an important point. All the answers can't lie in the people who are responsible or with the people at the most senior levels. Talk to the people who are at the essential worker level and ask them, what does improvement or what does respect look like for you? And we brought them to the table and they submitted a 7 or 8 page plan to our organization on all of the things they thought our company should be doing to amplify and evolve our efforts around racial justice. We took that plan in to our CEO and executive committee members, and there was not one thing they said no to. One. And those recommendations has now framed what we're referring to as our 3-year racial justice strategy. I couldn't be more proud. I couldn't be more honored for us to take on this initiative, and it came from our people.
Yes, I love it.
Joy.
And one thing I'd like to say about that, Joy, but before I go on is, your organization has had a history of listening, right? Because sometimes we have these conversations and people think that they're just going to borrow from other people's strategies when they're not starting at the same place. And so because you've had a history of listening to your folks, and at our last debrief, some of the things that you all were talking about, they were just amazing. And so I just want to make that point. If you have not been listening, if you have not been asking, you cannot just go and think that you are going to have a watershed effect from people trusting you. What I'm telling you is that there was organizational trust already in place in order for that plan to be developed and shared and then accepted implemented, and then I'm sure you all are already starting to see the fruits of that labor. But I just wanted to make that point. Make sure you work with an organization that has had a history of listening and trust with throughout the organization with the workforce. So I just wanted to bring that up. I'm going to break my answer into two parts, right? So there's personally and then there's professionally, right? Personally, I've been too nice, right? I think that we got caught up too much in this whole grace conversation. And so when we needed to let people understand just how badly they were behaving, we did it with these kid gloves, and we were just so nice about it. And we patted them on the head and we said, but we know you didn't mean it, knowing good and well they did, right? So personally for me, I am not that nice anymore. I give it to you how you need it so that you can go do the work and make the right changes so that we all can move on and be better together. So that's the first thing personally. And I'm not mean, it's tough love. Professionally, I will say that from Diversity Inc.'s perspective, when you think about, again, the most important thing that we do all year, that's the Diversity Inc. Top 50 survey, right? But that's rear view facing, right? That looks at what you did last year, what the outcomes were, and pat yourself on the back depending on where you ranked. But with this pandemic, it was very clear to me that we needed to pivot very quickly and help people understand what the predictive side of things look like. And so professionally, we did the work to bring on the right brain power to deepen our bench so that we can help people understand what their workforce planning strategies should look like, and that the fairness element that we all want to see in who we're hiring and who we're keeping and who we're promoting and who we're identifying as high potential and high performing, that was the work professionally that needed to be done for us to continue to be of help and service to the companies that actually want to be measured and that are interested in transparency. So professionally and personally, those are the two things that were outcomes for 2020 for me.
I love that. I love listening to both of you, just nodding and taking it all in. Because no, it's funny. That's what I was alluding to earlier, right? I didn't really get to the work stuff, but I think that's what it is, Carolyn. It's not think I know, not think. I know that there gets to be a point where you just say, I'm not mean. I'm just crystal clear. And I don't have to sugarcoat this for you. If you're a senior leader, I mean, if you've earned that right through whatever pathway you took, then you should be able to hear some tough things because you make tough decisions. So I'm constantly having to make sure people understand this is not an either or, this is a both and. Mm-hmm. You make tough decisions, you should be able to hear tough stuff. And I'm gonna tell you point blank, stop doing that. It's not working, right? Start doing this. So I would say, I know at one point in my D&I career, it was, don't be prescriptive and don't do this and don't do this. And I'm like, no, I'm over that. You need to do these three things. And we're going to check it in 15 days, 30 days, 60. And if it's not working and you're like, you haven't given enough time, but we may have to pivot. So let's not get so married to what I said we're going to do for the next 2 years. It's not that. It's like we're looking at things quarter by quarter and quickly. And I think the thing that Joy, you also mentioned around listening, I mean, we did so many listening sessions. We brought in, experienced, psychologists, but who work in the space of racial healing and trauma to really talk about, let's have some conversation and let's give the space. And we have to continue to do that for people and share, without breaching confidentiality, right? What are we hearing so that people understand within the company? So it's, not the easy work. It's not the easy stuff.
I want to jump in there, and I know, Derek, you're going to kill me, but I'm sorry, I have to do this.
You're good.
From a professional development perspective, I also learned by paying closer attention to myself, because COVID has given me time. I will say that, okay? I have had a lot of time to reflect, right? And when we talk about delivering those hard messages, sometimes we talk ourselves out of having the conversation. Nobody ever stopped us from being honest. Nobody ever said, don't come to me with this. We decided that imaginary line that we drew for ourselves, we were not going to cross. And so sometimes you do have to take that moment and say, wait a minute, why am I standing in this moment thinking that this is information that no one wants to hear? And so that was also a huge part of it for me, taking a step back and saying, have I created this as a wall I cannot get over or climb? Or has this been something that has been put there, you know, and it is a barrier, and I need to figure out if it's even worth going around or over it? I think that was huge for me as well.
Carolyn, thank you. That is rebel leadership. Sorry, Joy. That is rebellion leadership in action, right? Just going, doing things differently, going outside the lines and being willing to step out and take a chance. Go ahead, Joy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I too agree with you, Carolyn. Would have to share some vulnerability on how it impacted me personally. I will tell you, the role of a chief diversity and inclusion officer is not an easy job, or anyone who's doing D&I work. It's a tough job. And I often tell people, it requires an emotional muscle. Any role I've ever had in my career. It just does. And to some degree, I don't want to use the word you have to get hardened, but you have to be conscious minded in how you approach people, how you don't let people hit your hot buttons, or, you know, because we all have them. Yes. But I will tell you, when George Floyd was killed, it removed the numbness that I had allowed to protect my heart around this work. And I think if I could have screamed, I probably would have not stopped screaming. And it was like all of these pent up feelings and emotions that I just did not know what to do with. My heart grieved for so many reasons. But yet the people that you serve, the people that you lead, they look for you for guidance, for strength, for answers, for encouragement. And it was that time where I had to do deep reflection to help sit with where I was around this and face my own realities so that I could help serve others. And I can't remember a time in my career like that before.
That's so beautiful, Joy. I mean, wow, you know, it's like, I can't believe that was May. That feels like ages ago, even though it was not. 100%, Joy. It's sitting with it. I felt the same way. My daughter asked me today, you know, hey mom, you know, I was watching the inauguration cathartic, right? She was watching me have this whole range of emotions and, you know, these feelings. And I said, yeah, it is cathartic for lots of reasons, because it was a release I think I just didn't have. I didn't allow myself to have, because you're so in the work, right? But I really appreciate that candor, Joy. I'm sure a lot of people do on this call, is that just because we work in the space of D&I, or whether you are directly or not directly in the space, doesn't mean you need to take time. You need to sit with things. You need to process. There's just so much. It's very complicated. The D&I is not one of those spaces where you do A and B and get C. You got to do a whole bunch of stuff to get an outcome. And some of it is activity driven. Some of it's very strategic and very pointed. So right, so across the gamut, and it's really the work of everybody at the end of the day. Everybody has a role in this. And, you know, one of the things that I've been trying to do, we've been doing at Thomson Reuters, you started to mention earlier, Carolyn, around kind of self-identification. One of the things around inclusion is we've really tried to look at, what does that mean? You know, so like I said, people can tick a lot of boxes. I certainly do, but how are we expanding our lens globally to understand our population? So if we go back to over-indexing on the internal population, you know, we've done tons of research to look at what's legal, not legal, what are our employees comfortable with. So it's going from 5 countries to identify disability or LGBTQ to, you know, upwards of 35 now, right? Or what does ethnicity mean? What does race mean? It doesn't mean the same thing from a US context. So we've really tried to expand to kind of really be a foundation for, and people might say, oh, you know, you're just looking at data. And yeah, the data is important because it helps feeds. What do we do for benefits? What are we doing for our people if we don't know who they are in the company? Yeah. So there's just been a lot of work that I wanted to share that's taken when you talk about, you know, kind of fighting the good fight and putting ourselves out there. It's also making sure the foundation is strong so that whether I'm in the role or not, we know who's at the company and we can fight for the talent that we have. And building real inclusion. So I just wanted to share that because it's a really unique thing that we've really taken on. It hasn't been easy. And a lot of people have said, well, why would we do that in India? Or why would we do that in, across Asia? And are they Asian? Are they white? Are they like what? We have to kind of tear it apart to figure out who we actually have and how we really look, how our customers look in as well.
Yeah.
People talk about mirroring our markets. Well, what does that mean if you don't know? So it's been an interesting journey from us from a self-ID perspective.
Incredible. Well, I just want to reiterate my humility and just appreciation for all three of you sharing your time and energy and wisdom with me and our audience and our future listeners. I think we're going to have to do a round 2 of this. We scratched the surface of my questions, and I felt like there's been so much value that you all shared from your personal and professional experiences. And I look forward to supporting each of you in whatever way I can or we can. And just know that we're a resource and advocate for you and for this mission. So with that, I just want to acknowledge each of you as Rebel leaders and powerful women leaders. And I wish you all the best throughout the rest of today, this special day, and throughout this year, and for what's to come. So thank you
so
for
much
joining us today.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you
And it was a
next time.
pleasure to see
It was a
you, Joy
blessing.
and Sophia.
It was a blessing.
Beautiful
Thank you.
as always. Take care.
Same here. So great to see you again. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.